In the previous video, we took a very quick look at some of the options for adding supports to a model. Now we're going to do a deeper dive into supports. If we don't add supports to a model like this, for instance, there's an overhang that won't print correctly. Let's take a look. I'll click Print Preview, close this, and now I'll slide down to that first layer of overhang. And then if I use the bottom slider, go all the way to the beginning of this layer, you can see that the nozzle goes right out into open space and then back again. There's nothing holding up that section of plastic, so it will just sag down and you'll end up with a wiry mess underneath that overhang. Now you might think the same thing would be true in this middle section. If I continue on, you can see that the nozzle goes out over open space and there's nothing supporting this piece of plastic. But in this case, there's a phenomenon called bridging, where both sides of this section of plastic are supported by solid anchors. So in effect, this plastic is bridging over that area. And this area is short enough, in this case this is 1 centimeter, that this plastic will not sag. It'll have enough tension on its own to maintain that straight line. I'll continue over, and the same for this section here. So the only section we really have to worry about is this overhanging section. So we'll go back. Before you add supports though, you should always consider the option of reorienting your part. So if I turn this part on one side or the other, can I eliminate supports? We know that as it's oriented now, it will need supports. If I click on it and I'll rotate, let's say I rotate it onto its side, 90 degrees, and I look at it, well, you can see that this whole section here is going to need supports. It's all hanging out in the open. So that won't work. I'll rotate it back to its original position. What about if I rotate it this way? Again, there's this whole section here that's going to need supports. This upper section will actually bridge, so that will be fine. We won't need to worry about that. But the underside would need supports. And if we rotate it in the other direction, same kind of thing. This T section here will need supports, but this upper section will not because it will bridge across. So there's no orientation for this particular object that will obviate the need for supports in some degree. It looks like this is the least amount of supports we'll need just for that one section, and we will rely on bridging for that center section there. So to add supports, we'll click on Supports, Enable Supports, and you have 4 options here: Normal Auto, Tree Auto, Normal Manual, and Tree Manual. We'll start with Normal Auto. Click Preview. I'll remove these pop-ups and move my scroller all the way to the top. And you can see that indeed Bamboo Studio added supports to that outer area, but it also added supports in that central area where we don't need them. So let's see how we can get away from that. One option is to right-click on the object and choose Support Blocker. And you have several different shapes you can choose from. I'll pick the cube, and I'm going to move the cube over to the area that I want to block the supports from happening. And you need to highlight the actual area. So it's up there, higher than the cube. I can either choose the Move option and pull it up so that it's covering that area, or I could have chosen Scale and just grab this scale square and try to grab a hold of that and then pull it up. So I'm actually making that cube bigger into a rectangle. I want to make sure that that whole area is covered. All right, now I'll click Preview again, and you can see that the supports have been blocked from that central area. The third option would be to use a support enforcer. So I'll click on the support blocker to get rid of it, right-click on the object that I want, and this time I'm going to add a support enforcer, also in the shape of a cube, and you'll see the cube is blue this time. And I'll move it over to the area that I want the supports to happen. Then I'll click on Global Process, and I'm going to switch from Normal Auto to Normal Manual. So I've manually indicated where I want the supports to take place, and they won't be added to any other part of the model. Let's see what that looks like. I'll click Preview, and you see that only that area of the model has supports, and nowhere else on the model does it have supports. Now, looking at this more closely, I can see that the supports go right up against the edge of the model, and that's not necessary because we know that filament will bridge an open area. So what I'm going to do is go back to Prepare, and I'm going to move this over so that only the outer end of that overhang is enforced. I'll click Print Preview again, and now you can see what happened is the support will go up and support the end of the model, but it won't touch it. So that'll make the supports very easy to remove, and it will leave that side of the model with a nice clean edge. And I can verify that by going down to the first layer that the supports are needed and all the way to the beginning. And you can see that the filament bridges across over to the supports, goes across the supports, and then bridges back, and then bridges over the interior gap, and bridges over that interior gap again. So that should print just fine the way it is. I'll move my slider back up to the beginning, go back to Prepare. And the other types of supports are tree supports. So because I have a support enforcer in place, I'm going to choose Tree Manual, because I've manually indicated where I want the supports to take place. But this time, the supports will be in tree form instead of linear. I'll click Preview, and you can see what a tree looks like, just as you imagine. Now, this, for a geometric shape, is not going to be as good as the regular supports. Tree supports are especially good for organic shapes. But let's go back, and I'll delete this enforcer, and I'll go to Tree Auto and click Preview so you can see what that looks like. There's the tree holding the end. But notice the center section. The supports are not on the model itself. They start from the print bed, and then they snake over and up to hold up that center section. And notice also that the tree supports are not covering that entire center section like it is on the end. And that's because the Bamboo Studio knows that the filament will bridge across that area. And in fact, we don't need any of those tree supports, so we could use a blocker to prevent those from being produced, or we could stick with just a support enforcer for the end. So you've got lots of different options here. I'll take one last look at another option. This time I'm going to switch back to normal auto, and I'm going to choose on build plate only. Remember, the first time we added supports without any blockers or enforcers, the supports were added right in the center section. So the bottom of the supports rested on the model itself, and then they also touched the top. So you would have potentially rough surface on this area of the model and the underneath of the model over here. But if I choose on build plate only and choose preview, what happened is the center section was not created at all because, unlike with tree supports, these normal supports cannot snake over and then under an unsupported area. They go straight up and down only. So if you say that you don't want any supports to touch any part of the model, you only want them on the build plate, then that is why this one section was created only. But again, if I were printing this model, I would choose to add a manual support enforcer so that I could eliminate this possible marring of the edge of the model there. And a quick review on how to do that. Right-click on the model, scroll down, choose Add Support Enforcer. I'm going to choose a cube. I'm going to move it out so that it's centered on that section, but not touching the model. And then I'll use the scaling option to zoom in, try to grab that blue square. There we go, and just stretch it out so that that section of the model is encompassed in the enforcer. Then I'll click on Global Support, and I'm going to choose Manual Normal Supports and Preview to verify that everything is good the way I want it. So I know that's a lot of information. There's lots of different types of supports. Over time, you'll learn which support options are best for the type of specific geometries that you're printing. There is no one correct support option. It really depends entirely on your model. So feel free to try the different support options, export your sliced model and print the model. Then you can see for yourself how the different support options work in reality.